Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. "2:17 a.m. blinked accusingly from the phone screen, summoned by the rasping scrape below. Just 3 days adrift in this half-gutted house. A skeleton crew's detritus, tools, lumber, dust, my only company. Below lay the basement, a raw concrete maw awaiting transformation. A fool's bargain, this place, born of desperation and the wreckage of a marriage. But the price had been a siren song I couldn't ignore. A threadbare blanket offered meager defense against the chill and the sound. Vermin, I reasoned, clutching the fabric tighter. Just vermin. The foreman had mentioned unwelcome tenants pending the final seal. Then a whisper slithered through the floorboards, thin and reedy. Hello? Faint, distinctly feminine, filtered through earth and timber. Is anyone there? My heart became a frantic drum against my ribs. I surged upright, phone beam cutting a swathe through the gloom. Just the mattress on the floor, stacked boxes casting long shadows, dust motes dancing like tiny spirits in the artificial light. Hello, it pleaded again, seeming closer this time, tinged with desperation. I need help. My mouth felt like parchment. Bare soles met frigid, naked hardwood, the carpets ripped out weeks ago, leaving the house's bones exposed. Each footfall was a small thunderclap in the pre-dawn stillness. Is someone down there? My own voice sounded alien, a strained croak. Yes, please help. Urgency sharpened the tone now, making it clearer, nearer. I'm trapped. Denim and cotton offered scant armor against the biting cold. The house's circulatory system, its heating, was mid-transplant, inert for another week. My breath plumed white in the phone's glare as I navigated the hallway's shadows towards the kitchen. There it stood, the basement door, a dark sentinel beside the void where a refrigerator would one day hum. The metal handle bit my palm with glacial cold. I'm coming down! The words echoed oddly in the hollow space. Hold on. The descent was treacherous. Raw wooden planks crudely fastened to supports, a provisional spine leading into the earth. The first tread groaned a protest but bore my weight. Downward I went into a vortex of dancing dust illuminated by the narrow beam. The underbelly of the house stretched vast and cavernous before me. Thick plastic shrouds hung like spectral curtains, partitioning zones of nascent construction. Drywall leaned in weary stacks against one wall. Paint cans and implements lay scattered like forgotten relics of the workday. Where are you? I called into the echoing expanse. Over here, the cry emanated from behind a veil of translucent plastic sheeting. Please hurry. I swept the sheeting aside. My light played over exposed timbers, raw insulation spilling like entrails from an unfinished wall segment. A workbench bore silent power tools. A heavy sledgehammer rested nearby, leaning casually against the studs. Hello? Behind the wall. The voice was sharp now, immediate, right there. There's a door. They sealed me in. My beam traced the rough concrete until it snagged on a subtle vertical line. The phantom edge of a door, camouflaged by layers of paint, the color of the foundation itself, an architectural ghost, easily missed. "I see it," I breathed. "Hold on, I'll try to open it." My fingers found no purchase. The seam was fused by time and neglect, its ancient hinges entombed in hardened pigment. "Please," a desperate sob, inches away through the barrier. "I've been here so long." I hefted the sledgehammer. Its weight felt purposeful, ominous. "Stand back from the door," I yelled, swinging the dense mass of steel. The shock jolted through my bones, vibrating up my arms. Again, flakes of ancient paint and rust erupted like shrapnel with each brutal percussion. The upper hinge shrieked and surrendered its grip. The lower one clung stubbornly. Cold sweat slicked my back despite the basement's chill, muscles screaming protest. Several more impacts, savage blows against the unyielding portal. Finally, with a groan of tortured metal, the lower hinge buckled. The door imploded inward, crashing onto the unseen floor beyond. The beam illuminated a cramped cell, perhaps 6 feet square. Stark concrete walls, utterly barren save for... Slam! The sound cannoned in the confined space. Darkness absolute swallowed the light. The room, me. I whirled, scrabbling at the heavy wood door now flush against its frame. Solid, immovable. "No!" I ran frantic hands over its surface. "Hey, let me out!" A chuckle resonated, low and resonant, scraping against the silence. Utterly unlike the desperate feminine plea moments before. This sound was ancient, resonant with something deeply wrong. "My gratitude," the new voice purred, seeming to emanate from the concrete itself, vibrating through the floor. "It has been an age since I entertained." My fists hammered the unyielding barrier. "This isn't funny. Open this damn door." "But you only just arrived," it crooned, a silken menace in the tone. "And the solitude does wear thin after decades." My phone screen sputtered, a dying star in my hand. Battery, 12%. "Who are you?" The question felt fragile in the oppressive dark. "What do you want?" The voice swirled, seeming to seep from the very pores of the stone around me. "Companionship," it whispered. "Conversation, stories exchanged in the dark hours before the dawn." "What happens at sunrise?" "Ah, the workers return. With their noise and their light, they may release you, perhaps." A dry rustle, like skeletal laughter. "Assuming you endure, assuming the sanity holds, unlike the others who came before." I sank, back pressed against the ungiving door, drawing my knees tight to my chest. The chill of the floor seeped through denim, reaching bone. My phone screen showed 2:43 a.m., over 4 hours stretched before me like an eternity of blackness. "There weren't any others," I countered, voice thin but trying for defiance. "You're lying." "Am I?" Amusement laced the tone. "From where do you imagine I acquired such vocal mimicry? All those charitable souls drawn down by cries for help. Such Samaritans." "Control your breathing. Stay calm. Think. The renovation crew had been working down here for weeks. They would have found this room, found you." "They are deaf to me," the voice answered the unspoken thought. "I resonate only with the dweller, the one whose slumber unfolds directly above my prison. Your dreams, your anxieties, They trickle down like rainwater, nourishing me, making me strong. The phone's light faltered further, dimming. 8%. "You're not real," I said, more to convince myself. "This is some kind of trick, or I'm having a breakdown from the stress, the divorce, the move. Oh, but I am exquisitely real." The voice was closer now, a sibilant whisper brushing my ear. "Allow me a demonstration." An icy point, colder than the concrete, colder than death, grazed the nape of my neck. I recoiled violently, scrambling away towards the center of the blackness, heart threatening to burst from my chest. "Don't touch me." "But your essence is fascinating," it mused, swirling around me. "The fear, the ache, the profound solitude that led you to seek refuge in this fractured house. Stop it." "I can savor it," the voice continued, now seeming to coil within my own skull, intimate and violating. The sharp sting of betrayal, the simmering rage, the hollow echo inside where a life used to be. I clapped hands over my ears, a futile gesture against an enemy already inside the gates. "She discarded you, didn't she? For another, shinier, newer, gutted your world, leaving only debts and ashes in her wake." "Shut up!" The scream tore from my throat, raw and useless in the dark. "Get out of my head!" The phone screen winked out. Blackness absolute crashed down, thick and suffocating. A faint, slithering sound whispered across the concrete floor, drawing nearer. "Now!" The voice resonated deeper, closer, horribly intimate. "Now we converse without impediment, just you, me, and the banquet of your recollections." I wedged myself into a corner, trying to shrink into the angle of the walls, make myself small, invisible. The air grew sharp, frigid, each inhalation searing my lungs. "Please," a ragged whisper escaped me, "just let me go." "But I exert no physical restraint," it replied smoothly, almost conversationally. "The door remains sealed from without. My prison is yours for now." A beat of silence filled only by my frantic pulse. Though I have adapted over the long silence, learned to draw sustenance from the emanations of terror, of anguish, it preserves a facsimile of sanity. Something immaterial, yet chillingly distinct, brushed against my jeans. I lashed out with a foot, connecting only with void. "What are you?" The memory fades. It sighed, a sound like dust settling in an abandoned tomb. Human, perhaps, once, eons ago. Before the wall, before the silence became my world. Before I discovered the trick of weaving dreams into lures, of borrowing voices from the desperate air. Chronology dissolved in the Stygian gloom. Seconds bled into millennia. The voice was relentless, sometimes a sibilant whisper, inches from my ear, sometimes a piercing shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It pulled forth specters I'd fought to bury. My ex-wife Alara's face contorted in departure, the damning glow of illicit messages on her phone screen, the sickening crunch of metal from the night I nearly erased myself in a drunken haze. I fought back initially, arguing, weeping, railing against the unseen tormentor, anything to anchor my unraveling mind. "Is the accident," it urged, soft and intimate as a lover's secret. "Speak of the guilt that clings like grave dust." "No." Of flirting with oblivion, how a sliver of you welcomed the final impact. "Stop it." How you sought refuge in these broken walls because they mirrored your own shattering. How inevitable, how fitting that you should find your way down here to me. I slammed my skull back against the concrete, the sharp bloom of pain a welcome grounding tether. You're not real. This isn't real. Then how? It insinuated, malice dripping from each syllable. Do I know of the small vial of pills tucked away in your nightstand? The ones you contemplate when the silence screams too loudly in the dead of night? A surge of blind fury propelled me forward, fists flailing wildly at the unseen enemy in the darkness. My knuckles met unyielding stone. Agony exploded through my hand, white-hot and blinding. Warm wetness trickled between my fingers. The voice erupted in horrid, ecstatic glee. Yes, pain, it vivifies, it proves your fragile reality. I collapsed onto the frigid floor, cradling my mangled hand against my chest. Why? The word was barely audible, choked with pain and despair. Because I endure, it hissed, the sound seeming to swell, filling the cell, pressing in from all sides. Because I must, the hunger is eternal, a pause heavy with dreadful implication. And your suffering, exquisite. Consciousness became a frayed edge. I drifted, the voice a hellish drone weaving through my fragmented thoughts. Eventually, I ceased responding, retreating inward, focusing solely on the ragged rhythm of my breath, the fierce throb in my hand, the desperate, silent battle for sanity. Images of Alara surfaced, the life we'd shared, the future dissolved to smoke. But beneath the familiar ache, a new layer emerged. Not peace precisely, but a quiet resignation, a weary acceptance of the wreckage. You grow tedious, the voice hissed after a long silence, petulant now. Where is the delectable agony from before? Silence was my only reply. Very well, a different approach. A profound cold descended, instantly leaching warmth from the air. Frost feathered my skin, prickling sharply. Breathing became labored, the atmosphere thick as sludge, each gasp an effort. Do you fear the end? It whispered, a razor's edge of suggestion against my ear. To expire here, frozen, alone, utterly forgotten in this lightless crypt? I hugged my knees tighter, teeth rattling uncontrollably in my jaw. No one will grieve. They will find your frozen remains, assume misfortune. Another unfortunate casualty of careless renovation. Breathe in, breathe out, hold fast, stay present. You resist no longer, it shrieked, frustration cracking the inhuman tone. Struggle, cry out, plead for release. No, I forced out between chattering jaws. The single word, a monumental effort. Then perish, freeze, become one with this eternal dark. Join me. The cold intensified, biting deep into muscle and bone. Numbness crept into my fingers and toes, a slow tide erasing sensation. Yet paradoxically, the terror receded, replaced by an unnerving, almost transcendent stillness. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I whispered, the words frosting in the frigid air. Liar, you feast on fear, on pain, on shadows. But I've dwelt in shadows before, after Alara left, after the wreck I endured. Silence. You cannot inflict deeper wounds than those I already carry. You cannot isolate me further than I have already been. An unearthly screech tore through the space, vibrating with impotent fury and a despair that mirrored my own recent past. Abruptly, the crushing cold vanished. Warmth rushed back into my limbs, painful in its sudden intensity. You were meant to shatter, the voice howled, anguish and disbelief warring in its tone. They always shatter. "Not me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "Not this time." An immense quiet descended then, profound and absolute. For an immeasurable stretch, only the sound of my own ragged breathing filled the void. Then, distant, muffled, filtering from above, human voices, tangible voices, the construction team arriving with the dawn. "Hello!" My shout was raw, scraping my throat. "Down here! Help!" Heavy footfalls pounded on the temporary stairs. Beams of light sliced through the oppressive black as the door groaned open under force. Merciful God! A rough hand grasped my arm, hauling me to my feet. My legs trembled, barely supporting me. "How long were you stuck in there, mate?" "Since last night," I rasped, shielding my eyes against the sudden intrusion of light. The door, it just slammed shut behind me. They guided me upward, out of the tomb, into the shocking brilliance of morning sunlight pouring through the kitchen's skeletal window frames. Someone draped a coarse, dusty blanket over my shoulders. Another was already on the phone, summoning paramedics for my bleeding, swollen hand. "That space isn't supposed to be there," the foreman, Silas, muttered, surveying the dark opening with professional unease. "Doesn't show on any blueprint I've seen. We're walling it off for good today. Concrete." I offered a numb nod. Explanations were futile. The truth belonged to the abyss below, a secret best left buried. As the emergency responders arrived, their presence loud and real in the quiet house, a final spectral whisper brushed the edge of my hearing, faint as dying breath, carried on the dust motes. "Until we meet again." But the fear held no purchase now. Certain shadows once traversed lose their power. Certain agonies forge an unexpected resilience. Certain descents into terror illuminate unforeseen horizons within the self. This house would be sold, relinquished as soon as possible. A new beginning elsewhere was imperative. Yet I would carry the imprint of this night, the knowledge of having confronted something primordial and ravenous in that subterranean cell, a parasite thriving on despair. And I had emerged, scarred but intact. The paramedic gently tended to my mangled hand, his questions clinical, routine. My answers were brief, oblique. The true narrative would remain entombed with the entity, sealed behind fresh concrete and drywall, perhaps to murmur only in the troubled dreams of those yet to come. But its dominion over me, its power drawn from my pain, was fractured. The dawn had broken, and in its clean, uncompromising light, I was finally unbound. The sodium lamps sputtered awake, painting elongated skeletal fingers of shadow across the asphalt as Alara rounded onto her avenue. She hugged her satchel tighter, a reflexive shield against the encroaching gloom. The library's quiet hum had held her captive longer than intended. The homeward trek always seemed to stretch, elastic and menacing after dusk. It began as a flicker at the edge of sight, a shape cloaked in shadow, hooded, perhaps half a block adrift in her wake. "Don't be absurd," she chided herself. Just another soul navigating the evening tide. Yet an unsettling deliberateness marked the figure's gait, a rhythm that resonated dissonantly, seeding a cold dread deep within her. Alara quickened her stride, the staccato beat of her own boots echoing unnaturally loud against the pavement's hush. An urge to pivot, to confirm, clawed at her resolve, but she fixed her gaze on the intersection glimmering ahead. 3 more blocks. Just 3. Reaching the corner, she surrendered, hazarding a swift glance backward. A gasp hitched in her throat. Closer. The hooded form had halved the distance, a mere 20 feet separating them. Pursuit undeniable now. Raw panic surged, a tidal wave obliterating reason. She broke into a sprint, decorum dissolving into frantic flight. Behind her, the heavy thud of answering footsteps confirmed the chase. Her mind, a frantic hummingbird trapped in her skull. Scream, wave down a passing car. Home felt agonizingly near, yet impossibly far. Fingers scrambled for her phone, nearly fumbling it into the unforgiving concrete. Just as the emergency number hovered beneath her thumb, a voice cut through the night air. "Hey, hold on!" Instinct shrieked, "Run!" Yet some aberrant impulse slowed her, turned her. Her thumb remained poised, a hair's breadth from summoning aid. The figure jogged closer, palms raised in a gesture meant to placate. Light spilled onto his features as he pushed back the hood. Recognition dawned, a confusing tide washing over the terror. Leo. The name escaped her lips, a breathy mix of disbelief and residual fear. What on earth? Leo, her neighbor from 2 floors below, offered a sheepish grin. "Apologies, truly didn't mean to spook you. Saw you walking, thought I'd catch up. Wanted to give this back." He proffered a worn paperback, the novel she'd lent him the previous week. Alara accepted it, her hands betraying a tremor. A dazed incredulity settled over her. You chased me through the darkened streets to return a library book." He had the decency to flush. "Yeah, well, phrasing it like that. Not my most brilliant moment. Didn't grasp how it must have looked until you bolted." A shaky laugh escaped her, adrenaline beginning its slow retreat. "Okay, Leo, next time, maybe just wait until we're both inside the building?" He nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. Lesson learned. Can I, at least escort you the rest of the way? I promise a respectable trailing distance." A moment's hesitation, then a nod. Despite the scare, Leo was a known quantity, harmless if occasionally lacking social finesse. The remaining blocks passed in a stilted exchange about the returned novel, yet Alara's thoughts churned. How swiftly fear had ambushed reason, twisting an innocuous encounter into perceived peril. Even as she mentally scolded her overreaction, a quiet internal voice insisted on caution, whispering that vigilance was prudence, because the shadow behind her might not always belong to a well-meaning neighbor. They reached the apartment building. Alara mumbled a good night, her fingers still unsteady as they navigated the lock. Ascending the stairwell, she made a silent note to thank her parents for those long-ago self-defense lessons. Useless tonight, perhaps, but the instilled confidence had likely kept her from shattering completely. Inside her apartment, the heavy click of the deadbolt echoed. She leaned against the door, releasing a long, shuddering breath. Fear ebbed, replaced by a strange, almost giddy relief. Safe. A misunderstanding, yet as she prepared for bed, unease clung like damp fabric. The visceral memory of absolute terror, the certainty of malicious pursuit, refused to fade entirely. Sleep remained elusive. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren prickled her nerves. Around 2, she abandoned the effort, padding to the kitchen for tea. Waiting for the kettle's whistle, she found herself drawn to the window. Below, the street lay deserted, bathed in the jaundiced glow of the lamps. Peaceful, ordinary, difficult to reconcile with the menace it had held just hours before. Then, movement. A figure striding purposefully along the opposite pavement. Ilara's pulse leapt before she wrestled it back under control. Late shift worker, early jogger, normalcy asserted itself. But as she watched, the figure halted. Slowly, deliberately, its head tilted upwards, seeming to fix directly on her window. Ilara recoiled, heart hammering against her ribs. Impossible. 4 floors up, lights extinguished. She couldn't be visible. And yet, the certainty. She forced another look. Emptiness. The street was vacant once more. Had she conjured it? Was her mind still buzzing with adrenaline, projecting phantoms? She shook her head, trying to dispel the clinging absurdity. This was ridiculous, imagination running rampant. Daylight would expose the foolishness of it all. But as she finally retreated to bed, the forgotten tea cooling beside her, she couldn't shake the conviction that something fundamental had shifted, that the world's shadows now held a deeper, more ambiguous threat. The following days unfolded under a pall of hyper-awareness. Ilara found her gaze constantly scanning her surroundings, her body flinching at unexpected sounds. She altered her routes, purchased pepper spray, its small weight a cold comfort in her bag. Friends remarked on her jumpiness, but she deflected their inquiries. How to articulate a fear born from an event that hadn't truly happened? A week after the Leo incident, the unease solidified into something tangible, chilling. Returning from the grocer's, arms burdened, she felt it, that electric prickle on her nape, the unmistakable sensation of being observed. Casually, fighting the urge to appear frantic, she surveyed the street. Moderately busy, people flowed homeward, nothing overtly amiss. But then, across the road, lagging by half a block, a figure swathed in a dark hoodie, mirroring her pace. Her breath hitched. No coincidence. She accelerated slightly, heart thudding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. In her peripheral vision, the figure matched her increased speed. No, not again. Abruptly, she veered into a small bodega, feigning interest in dusty chipwrecks while her eyes tracked the street through the grimy window. The hooded shape drifted past, showing no interest in the store, continuing its trajectory down the block. A ragged sigh escaped her. See? Coincidence. Nothing. After several tense minutes, she exited, scanning nervously. The figure was gone. Feeling foolish yet profoundly unsettled, she hurried the final stretch home. It was while fumbling with her apartment key that she saw it. A small square of paper, folded precisely, wedged into the door frame. Trembling fingers unfolded it. Stark block letters spelled out, "I see you." Ice water flooded her veins. Prank, mistake, anything but this. She stumbled inside, slamming and locking the door, groceries tumbling unheeded. Pacing became her only recourse, mind racing in frantic circles. The police, what could she tell them? Vague suspicions. An unnerving note potentially meant for another resident. She fought for rational thought. A cruel joke, perhaps. A friend exploiting her recent edginess. But a deeper instinct screamed otherwise. This felt targeted, deliberate. Someone was watching, stalking, and they wanted her aware of their gaze. The subsequent weeks devolved into a waking nightmare steeped in paranoia. The hooded figure became a ubiquitous presence, glimpsed across crowded streets, reflected fleetingly in shop windows, always lurking just beyond clear focus. More notes materialized. Always watching. You can't hide. I'm getting closer. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. Every floorboard creak, every distant shout sent jolts of terror through her. Friends and family voiced concern, their worry a palpable thing, but she couldn't articulate the suffocating reality of her fear. How could she, when part of her still questioned its very existence? It culminated on a night slick with rain. Hurrying home, umbrella gripped like a weapon, she saw him. The hooded figure, standing motionless beneath the stark glare of a streetlight, directly in her path, facing her. No ambiguity this time, no pretense of chance. Alara froze, terror welding her feet to the wet pavement. An eternity seemed to pass in the space between heartbeats, the rain drumming a relentless rhythm around them. Then, slowly, with chilling deliberation, he lifted a hand, beckoning her forward. Something within her fractured. She whirled and ran, propelled by pure, unadulterated panic. Footsteps pounded behind her, relentless, closing the distance. She didn't know how long she ran, or where her flight took her, only that escape was the sole imperative. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto her arm, spinning her around. A scream tore from her throat as she swung the umbrella wildly. "Whoa, hey, Alara, it's me, Leo!" Her vision swam, then sharpened. Leo stood before her, breathless, his expression etched with concern. "Are you all right? I saw you sprinting like the devil was after you." Her gaze darted wildly around the rain-swept street. A few passers-by stared, bewildered. No hooded figure, empty. Did you see anyone?" she choked out. "Following me?" Leo shook his head, baffled. "No, just you. What's happening, Alara? You've seemed off for weeks now." The adrenaline fled, leaving her trembling, adrift in confusion. Had it all been a phantom chase, a product of her fractured nerves? Was she truly losing her grip on reality? As Leo gently guided her homeward, his quiet questions probing wounds she couldn't expose, a decision formed. Tomorrow, help, a therapist, someone, because real or imagined, this consuming dread was unsustainable. Yet, as they reached the familiar sanctuary of her building, she cast one final glance back down the rain-lashed street, and there, nestled deep within the ink-black shadows across the way, she saw it, or thought she saw it, a flicker of movement, the indistinct silhouette of a hooded figure watching in utter stillness. Real or not, her nightmare was far from over. First, the static erupted, a furious blizzard of sound tearing through the car's speakers, obliterating the blues track that had been a lonely companion these past 3 hours. Like grit flung against glass, it scoured the silence. My fingers fumbled with the tuner, seeking refuge on another frequency, but found only an endless expanse of white noise, roaring and vacant. Then, slicing through the chaos, unnervingly intimate, came the whisper of my name, Elias. My hand froze mid-twist. The voice, barely louder than breath, carried an undertone, a discordant note that prickled the skin along my spine. A glance at the dashboard clock. 2:37 a.m. Ahead, the cone of my headlights punched a hole in the immense darkness, illuminating nothing but an empty stretch of Arizona highway. Desert scrub and skeletal saguaros flanked the asphalt, their moon-cast shadows writhing like things alive. Another car? Not for the better part of an hour. The last outpost of humanity had been a skeletal gas station, its pumps rusting under pale fluorescent lights. I'd filled the tank, poured lukewarm coffee down my throat. The man behind the counter, ancient and weathered as the landscape, had fixed me with a peculiar stare when I'd mentioned heading east on Route 60. His silence then felt heavy, weighted. The static persisted, a constant crackling presence, but the voice withheld itself. I fiddled uselessly with the antenna. A parched tightness seized my throat. My hand reached for the coffee cup. It rattled, empty. Then the whisper returned, gaining substance, closer now. Elias, listen. Instinct slammed my foot onto the brake. The tires bit into the pavement with a gravelly sigh as the car decelerated. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Phone. I needed my phone. Just the sound of another person, any person, to anchor me. I guided the car onto the dusty shoulder, shifted into park, the engine ticking in the sudden quiet. My phone lay dark in the cup holder. I snatched it up. The screen flared to life, a single tentative bar of signal and a notification, an unsent message alert. A cold fist clenched in my gut when I saw the sender. My own number. Fingers numb, trembling slightly, I tapped it open. 2 words glowed against the screen. Don't stop. The timestamp was barely a minute old. I hadn't laid a hand on the device for hours. I stared, breath catching in my throat, each inhalation shallow and sharp. The radio static abruptly surged, swelling to fill the cabin, and through its shrieking surge, the whisper resonated again, insistent, Elias, behind you. Every nerve went taut. My gaze snapped to the rearview mirror. Blackness stared back. Then, far down the ruler-straight highway, twin points of intense light bloomed, swelling rapidly, consuming the distance. Adrenaline surged. I threw the gear shift into drive, stomped the accelerator. The engine screamed in protest as I wrenched the car back onto the tarmac. In the mirror, the lights dilated, closing the gap with predatory speed. My phone pulsed against my hand. Another message, my own number again. Faster. The needle climbed, 80, 90, pushing past. Yet the lights clung, unwavering. Impossible to discern the vehicle's shape. The glare was blinding, flooding my mirrors with pure, hostile white. The radio static shifted, modulating into a high-frequency whine, painful in its intensity, and woven through it, like threads of a nightmare, came torn fragments of speech, coming, can't let them find you. Sweat slicked my palms on the steering wheel. The highway unfurled before me, an endless black ribbon vanishing into the void. No exits, no turnoffs marked. No other souls on this desolate stage. Just me. The whining static and the blinding presence latched onto my tail. The phone vibrated once more. Take the next right. A strangled laugh escaped me, harsh and foreign in the enclosed space. Right where? Into the damn desert? The map in my memory showed nothing, only rock and thorn for miles. Off the road meant oblivion. As if in response, the headlights behind flared, incandescent, an unbearable nova that forced me to avert my eyes from the mirrors. The pursuing engine's roar deepened, a visceral thrum I felt resonating in my chest cavity, and then I saw it. Directly ahead, where solid guardrails should have been, a distinct break materialized. Beyond it, leading away into the impenetrable dark to the north, snaked a dirt track. A path I would swear on my life hadn't existed an instant before. The phone buzzed, urgent, now! I wrenched the steering wheel hard, right. Tires shrieked, protesting the violent change in direction. The car fishtailed wildly, threatening to break free, but somehow held the turn. We hit the dirt road with a bone-jarring impact that slammed my teeth together. A fleeting glance in the rearview mirror showed the pursuing headlights, continuing their trajectory, undeterred, blazing past the turnoff down the main highway until they vanished. They hadn't even slowed. I eased off the accelerator but kept moving along the rutted track, heart still a frantic drum against my bones. After perhaps a mile, the oppressive presence feeling lifted, I slowed to a halt. The engine ticked, cooling in the sudden, profound silence. The radio speakers emitted nothing now, not even the faintest hiss. One final vibration from the phone. Get out, walk 100 steps north, bring the phone. I sat motionless for a long minute, hands welded to the wheel. Every rational thought screamed to reverse, find the highway, drive until dawn broke over a town, any town, but compulsion, or perhaps a deeper dread, unlatched the door. I stepped out. The desert night air was sharp, cold. My footsteps crunched on the loose earth as I began walking north, phone clutched tight, counting each step into the immense, watchful quiet. Moonlight rendered the landscape in stark monochrome, carving deep shadows behind every boulder and cactus. 98, 99, and on the 100th step, I saw it. A crude wooden cross, small and weathered gray, thrust into the unforgiving ground. Affixed to it, shielded by a clear plastic sleeve, was a piece of paper. With hands that shook uncontrollably, I drew it out. A newspaper clipping, yellowed but legible, dated precisely 1 year from tomorrow. The headline seized the air from my lungs. Body of missing man identified on Route 60, Elias Thorne, 34, apparent victim of hit and run. Tucked beneath the clipping, a handwritten note scrawled on lined paper. I tried warning myself the last time. It didn't work. Maybe this time will be different. The handwriting was unmistakably my own. The phone in my hand gave a final soft buzz. This wasn't a received message, but a draft, composed and saved, never sent, dated 1 year ago today. They won't stop until they find someone else. The cross is kinder than the morgue. Leave this for the next Elias. Keep driving west. Don't look back. I stood frozen in the vast, cold darkness, the paper trembling between my fingers. Then, carried on the night air from the direction of the highway, came the faint but growing drone of distant engines. Headlights swept the horizon, searching. Panic seized me. I sprinted back towards the dark shape of my car, gravel scattering underfoot. The engine turned over instantly, a small miracle. I spun the car around, pointing it west along the dirt track, away from the highway, away from the returning lights. The radio remained dead silent. The phone stayed dark. Driving through the remainder of the night, the words echoed, "The next Elias." I thought of the man who left the cross, the one whose warning had failed him, the one immortalized in that future headline. Dawn found me crossing into California. I found the first nondescript motel in a small, sun-bleached town and collapsed into sleep for 12 solid hours. Waking, raw and dislocated, I wrote down every detail of the night, sealed it in an envelope addressed to myself, and mailed it with instructions to open it in precisely 11 months. That was 3 weeks ago. Night driving is a memory. Empty highways, desert vistas, I avoid them like plague zones. Sometimes, reflexively, I check my phone, searching for messages from my own number. Silence remains. 10 months until the envelope arrives. Whether its contents will be a necessary reminder or a relic of a averted fate, I cannot know. But the image persists. That lonely cross under the Arizona moon. The Elias who put it there. The Elias who didn't make the turn. And somewhere, perhaps even now, another Elias driving east on Route 60 as the static begins to crawl through his speakers, whispering his name. Will he heed the impossible warnings? Will he understand in time? Yesterday, I traded my car. The new one doesn't have a radio. The key grated in the lock of my city workshop one last time. I registered the flaking paint on the handle, a small wound of neglect, then pivoted away. My sedan sagged with luggage, a scattering of boxes trailed by the hulking shadow of a rented truck. Weariness clung to me like the urban grime I craved to escape, threaded with a tremor of apprehension. This retreat, this flight to silence, was meant to cleanse, to offer ground for a new beginning, away from the relentless clamor. It was a month prior that a cryptic listing snagged my attention. A forgotten warehouse, cloaked in dust, situated in a hamlet bypassed by progress and major roads. Its dereliction was reflected in the price, an invitation few seemed willing to accept. A single swift visit sealed the pact. My vision was an antique emporium born from years spent trafficking in relics and curiosities, a trade that resonated within me. The structure itself sighed with age, paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The roofline canted as if weary, the air inside thick with the scent of mildewed timber. Yet it felt authentic, it felt like anchorage. Disgorging myself into the village that day, I was struck by its languid pulse. The main thoroughfare, narrow and hushed, hosted a few figures perched on benches, their conversations murmured into the quiet air. Haste was a foreign currency here. I eased my car to a halt before the newly acquired warehouse, pausing to absorb the whisper of the breeze against the weathered facade. The building seemed more ancient, more burdened than memory served. Above the entrance, the ghost of a sign, Pendleton's Provisions, hung askew. Windows stared blankly through layers of grime. Porch boards crumbled underfoot. A daunting renovation loomed, yet that prospect didn't stir fear. My true anxiety coiled around the building's bones, the dread of pouring my savings into a structure poised to collapse. Still, I unfolded myself from the car, stretched, surveyed my domain. Across the street, a neighbor offered a silent wave. Amiable, perhaps, but an inexplicable coolness permeated the air, unrelated to the season. Pushing open the great front door, my entrance disturbed decades of settled dust. Footfalls echoed in the cavernous space. Ghostly shelves lined the walls, remnants of its mercantile past. Counters bore the faint impressions of old receipts, faded advertisements whispering of bygone transactions. The air hung stale, redolent of damp paper left to rot in shadow. I navigated towards the rear, discovering a small office tucked away. Its lone window gazed upon an overgrown backyard, a tangle of green reclaiming its territory. And there, centered in the ceiling above a scarred wooden desk, was a trapdoor. Odd I hadn't registered it during my initial walkthrough. Standing on tiptoe, I nudged it with the bristled end of a broom. It rattled faintly, stubbornly sealed. A problem for another time, I reasoned. The remainder of the afternoon bled away in the labor of transferring boxes, carving out a rudimentary living space in one corner, a cot, a folding table. The long drive had settled deep in my muscles. Surrender felt appropriate. Night fell, swallowing the warehouse in profound silence. No city symphony of sirens and traffic here. Initially, the quiet was a balm. Then the building began to speak, the subtle creaks and pops of old timbers settling. But around midnight, a different sound emerged from the stillness above, a soft, dragging cadence. It suggested footsteps on dusty floorboards hampered by a peculiar, uneven gait. Back and forth it paced, punctuated by pauses, and then something akin to a stifled growl. My heart began a frantic tattoo against my ribs. A knot tightened low in my gut. Raccoon, I told myself, some feral creature seeking shelter. Yet the rhythm felt wrong, too slow, too deliberate, possessing a weight that belied small paws. Lying rigid in the dark, clutching the thin blanket, my breath hitched. Minutes stretched, taut and agonizing before the sounds receded. Sleep remained elusive, my throat parched, brow slick with cold sweat. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. Morning light brought with it a determined denial. A dream, mostly a dream. Pulling on worn boots, I resolved to inspect the trapdoor. Lacking a ladder, I constructed a precarious ziggurat of crates. Pushing upwards, the panel shifted, but met resistance, seemingly barred from within. A crowbar became my argument, wedged into the seam. Several forceful shoves, the wood groaning in protest, and the door finally yielded. I aimed the beam of my flashlight into the darkness, then levered myself through the opening. The attic was a cramped, oppressive space beneath a sharply pitched roof, crisscrossed by heavy rafters draped in cobwebs thick as shrouds. Dust, disturbed by my intrusion, danced in the air, prickling my nostrils. A single grimy window at the far end admitted only a feeble blade of light. Crates and forgotten trunks huddled in the gloom. The floorboards protested under my weight. A foul miasma, sharp and sickening like spoiled meat, assaulted my senses. Clamping a hand over my nose, I fought back a wave of nausea. A few feet away, my eye caught something disturbing. Deep, irregular scratches gouged into the wooden wall, as if something possessing formidable claws had desperately tried to tear through. A vice tightened around my chest. I swept the flashlight beam across the damage. Several long, parallel scores, brutally deep. I'd encountered rot and ruin in old buildings, but never violence like this etched into the structure itself. The stench intensified near that violated wall. A shudder traced its way down my spine. My breath grew shallow. Scanning the shadowed corners, I spotted more gouges near the far end. Then, a distinct rattle from behind a stack of crates. I froze, flashlight held like a cudgel, senses screaming. Nothing moved. The frantic drumming of my own pulse filled my ears. A muttered curse escaped my lips. I remained motionless, listening intently. Silence returned. Turning deliberately, I retreated to the opening, lowered myself down, and wrestled the trapdoor back into place. Standing on the office floor, my hands trembled uncontrollably. Ghosts, monsters, such notions had always belonged to fiction, not my pragmatic reality. Yet something resided up there, perhaps a large animal, I reasoned desperately. A diseased raccoon, a feral dog, trapped and desperate. The reek alone spoke of decay, of something rotting. An animal control service seemed the logical step, but this village slumbered outside such conveniences. Inquiries later that day yielded only shrugs from the locals. One suggested Mr. Thorne, a handyman known to occasionally handle pest problems. I jotted his number into my notebook, a fragile lifeline. That afternoon, I attempted to impose order on the main room, wrestling dusty shelves, discarding accumulated refuse, arranging a preliminary display for my nascent antique business. I forced my mind towards productivity, yet every glance towards the office sent a fresh wave of dread washing over me. As evening approached, I wedged a sturdy chair beneath the trapdoor handle, a gesture both ludicrous and necessary. A nervous laugh escaped me, swallowed by the cavernous space. My palms remained stubbornly damp. Each groan of the ancient floorboards underfoot sent my head snapping around. Exhaustion had settled bone deep by evening. Canned soup, heated on a small camping stove, constituted dinner at my folding table. Darkness pooled in the corners of the vast warehouse. I sought distraction in my phone, but the signal flickered, unreliable. Around 11, I prepared for bed, extinguishing the main overhead bulb, leaving only the small lamp beside my cot casting a weak amber glow. The cot felt small, vulnerable beside looming stacks of unpacked boxes. Lying there, mind racing, I eventually forced my eyes shut. And then it returned. The scraping sound from the attic. Slow, laborious, like something immense being dragged across the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. Breath came in short, sharp gasps. I sat bolt upright, hand instinctively closing around the lamp. The thought of investigating was paralyzing. I could only listen. The dragging paused. A low, guttural noise followed, vibrating through the floorboards, raising the hairs on my arms. A cold sweat broke out across my skin. A shiver traced my spine. Should I shout? The fear of what might answer choked the impulse. Questions swirled. Animal, human, squatters perhaps, finding refuge in the abandoned space. But those gouges, they didn't speak of human desperation. My mind conjured the image of those deep scores, the sheer force required. Bile rose in my throat. The air felt unnaturally cold, yet I was sweating profusely. A soft thud echoed from above. Then, silence. I lay back, pillow damp beneath my head, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Sleep came only in brief, feverish snatches, my body taut, jolting at every incidental creak. Morning found me aching, head throbbing. My first act was to call the handyman. Mr. Thorne's voice was calm, measured. He couldn't come until the weekend. 4 days. Frustration warred with fear, but he was my only option. I had to endure. The intervening days were spent in a haze of sorting stock, cleaning shelves, a forced normalcy punctuated by sporadic scuffles from above. Daytime noises were muted, a soft bump, a distant scrape, nothing like the nocturnal performance. I gleaned fragments of the building's history from a couple of locals. An elderly man recalled it as Pendleton's Provisions, run by a family he described only as peculiar. Odd hours, sudden closures. They kept to themselves, he remembered with a shrug, vanishing years ago. No one had occupied the place since. The necessary repairs were too daunting. Had anyone mentioned strange noises from the attic? He chuckled, dismissing it. Old buildings groan, he said. His casualness offered no comfort. The memory of those claw marks remained vivid, sharp. On the third night, I tried a new tactic, a small tape recorder placed near the office door, a sentinel in the dark. My flashlight lay ready on the table. Midnight arrived, and with it, the dragging sound. My chest constricted, breath hitched. It seemed slower tonight, almost circular in its movement. A distinct scraping followed, nails or claws on wood. Trembling, I retrieved the flashlight and crept towards the office. Standing directly beneath the trap door, I aimed the beam upwards. The sound ceased abruptly. I waited, knees weak, stomach churning. The foul odor, that same putrid signature I'd encountered in the attic, drifted down, thick and cloying. Gagging, I stumbled back, hand clamped over my mouth. A sudden loud thump resonated from directly overhead. I nearly dropped the flashlight. Cursing under my breath, I retreated hastily to my cot, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Wide-eyed, I waited for further disturbance. None came. Dawn was breaking before I finally succumbed to a few hours of troubled sleep. The next morning, I rewound the tape. The recording was marred by static, yet through the hiss emerged a distinct, low growl and the unmistakable sound of scraping. My pulse leaped. It defied easy explanation, deeper, more resonant than any raccoon. My mouth went dry. I wiped sweat from my palms. I kept the tape, evidence perhaps, something to show Mr. Thorne. If he believed, maybe we could face it together. The prospect of confronting it alone was unthinkable. When Mr. Thorne finally arrived, he was a stocky man, bearded, projecting an air of unflappable competence. That composure wavered slightly as I recounted my experiences. He agreed to inspect the attic. I stood back, a maelstrom of relief and dread swirling within me as he ascended the makeshift stairs of crates and pushed open the trapdoor. He sniffed the air, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Switching on a powerful work light, he hoisted himself into the gloom. I waited below, straining to hear. A grunt. He called down, confirming the claw marks, remarking on their unusual size. "Too large for raccoons," he muttered. He poked around some crates. A soft curse reached me. He described finding a crude nest in the corner, fashioned from torn fabric and debris. And something else, something viscous, slimy, slicking the floorboards nearby. He didn't elaborate. The stench, he admitted, became overpowering after only a few minutes, forcing his retreat. Heavy-duty traps could be set, he offered, but he confessed uncertainty. This didn't feel like a typical animal infestation. he suggested vaguely, finding someone with different experience. I paid him for his time, watched his truck disappear down the quiet street, and the weight of isolation settled upon me once more. That night, I sat in the main room, gazing through the dusty window at the sleeping village. Exhaustion warred with a rising tide of desperate resolve. Chase it out, seal the attic permanently, but what if it resisted? I possessed no firearm, only the rusty crowbar leaning against the wall. I ended up sitting with my back pressed against the cold plaster, crowbar resting by my side, flashlight heavy in my lap, listening to the profound silence. When the dragging steps inevitably began, my muscles seized. Breath grew shallow. I gripped the crowbar, knuckles white, and waited. The sounds traversed the space above. The growling followed, initially a low rumble, then swelling in volume. My heart hammered against my ribs. The lamp on my folding table vibrated with the tremor in my hand. The air felt distinctly colder. Tension knotted the muscles in my neck. The urge to scream rose again, only to be swallowed by the fear of provocation. Hours crawled by, muscles screaming, eyelids leaden. Around 4 in the morning, the noises abruptly ceased. My shirt clung to me, soaked in sweat. A bitter taste coated my tongue. I finally stumbled to the cot and collapsed, hollowed out by stress and sleeplessness. Waking near noon, I forced down some dry cereal, mind grappling for a plan. Boarding up the trapdoor seemed futile. Those claws could likely shred wood as easily as they'd scored it. Pacing the dusty floorboards, my nerves felt raw, frayed. I stared at the silent phone. Who could I possibly call? Tales of monstrous attic dwellers weren't likely to be met with credulity. It's just an animal, they'd say, but animals didn't exude that charnel house stench. Animals didn't move with that dreadful, deliberate weight. Weeks have bled together now. The antique shop remains a skeletal dream, its shelves half empty, its potential choked by the presence overhead. Setting up my business feels impossible. Each night is a vigil, bracing for the inevitable symphony of dragging steps and guttural threats. Mr. Thorne's unnerved reaction solidified my conviction. This is no mere beast skulking in the rafters. How to expel it remains an agonizing question. Abandoning this place means financial ruin, yet staying feels like a slow surrender to madness. And a stubborn, perhaps foolish part of me demands to know what shares this space. I am caught, suspended in a silent standoff. Thus far, it remains confined to the attic, and I have not ventured back up. But the nightly sounds gain strength, feel closer. The pervasive odor seems to seep more deeply through the old floorboards. I write this now at the folding table, the lamp casting long, dancing shadows. Midnight has passed. The cloying scent of decay drifts from the office doorway, coating the back of my throat. My hands tremble intermittently. I wipe perspiration from my brow again and again. Outside, the village sleeps, oblivious. No one would hear if I cried out. The image of those deep gouges flickers behind my eyes, a primal warning. Trespasser. A reckless impulse surges, grab the flashlight, climb the crates, confront the unknown. But imagining that beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating a shifting shape in the corner, the thought alone triggers a visceral dread, a racing pulse. Courage feels like a distant shore. I hear it now, dragging across the attic floorboards directly above me, louder tonight. The timbers groan under its passage. A ragged, throaty respiration accompanies the movement. My pulse pounds in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. My hands feel distant, numb. My jaw is clenched so tightly it aches. The scrape of claws on wood, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. What does it want? Why is it here? I only know it will not leave willingly. The idea of forcing a confrontation makes my stomach clench with icy fear. What happens then? Yet how much longer can I endure this siege? Trapped in this decaying warehouse, with something that feels ancient and wrong, I fear the stalemate is nearing its end. I fear the moment it decides the space between us is no longer sufficient. Silence was the promise of this ancient quarter, the allure that drew Elias here. He sought only the quiet dignity of historic stone, the unassuming company of simple neighbors. Unsolicited, however, came the sound, a low, serpentine whistle threading through the midnight air in his first week. It coiled from somewhere just beyond his window pane. Jolted upright, Elias peered into the narrow gorge of the lane below. Nothing stirred but the dance of a lone street lamp's glow on the perpetually damp walls. A passing drunkard, perhaps, a late-night wanderer. He dismissed it, but the whistle returned, punctual as a phantom clock, the next night and the night after. Never careless, always deliberate. It seemed to constrict the air in his lungs, tightening his chest. Doubts gnawed at him during the workday. The rhythmic tap of his pencil against the desk measured his attempts to rationalize, to convince himself it was mere fancy born of solitude. Elias was, by his own admission, an unremarkable soul. His days unfolded in the hushed confines of a small accountancy firm nestled in the city's time-worn heart. The work offered little spark, merely the means to keep the wolves of debt at bay. His apartment occupied a floor above one of the city's winding capillaries, lanes rarely trod after dusk. Here the buildings leaned inward, close enough to almost bridge the gap with outstretched arms. Nightfall draped the alleyways in a palpable chill, a cold that seeped through mortar and bone regardless of the season, exacerbated by his flat's stubbornly defunct heater. Layers of blankets became his shield against the encroaching frost. He adapted. It was his way. Each evening, his commute home began near 10 or 11. The journey was a protracted trek through a warren of constricted passages, a shortcut preferable to the circuitous main thoroughfares. Illumination was sparse, offered by antiquated fixtures bolted to stone facades, half of them long surrendered to darkness. His own footfalls became thunderous intrusions, echoing with an unnerving clarity that left him feeling starkly exposed in the slumbering city. Roughly 2 weeks after the whistle first intruded, a new sensation arose, the prickling certainty of unseen eyes. Halfway down, a shadowed cut through the nape of his neck would ignite, his pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He'd wheel about, heart leaping, only to confront the familiar emptiness. Tight stone confines, perhaps the fleeting shadow of a feral cat near a bin, or the scurry of a rat, but never a human presence. Once, desperation drove him to try moving with stealth, sliding his soles across the worn flags, straining to catch the betraying scrape of another's movement. Futility. Only the distant, melancholy drip of water from a rusted downspout answered the profound silence, a quietude somehow more menacing than any clamor. He mentioned it hesitantly to a colleague. The man offered only a shrug, mumbling about the city's age, its abundance of peculiar corners, suggesting Elias was merely unnerving himself. The notion of being afraid in his own neighborhood chafed. So one night, Elias deviated. He eschewed the deepest shadows, opting for a broader, more open street, adding a tedious 15 minutes to his walk. Yet even there it found him. Faint initially, the whistle crept upon the breeze, insidious, raising the hairs on his arms. He froze, listening. It persisted, seeming to ricochet off the surrounding architecture, a disembodied sound that drew closer the longer he remained still. The sheer disquiet of it, that simple, low-pitched motif repeating its mournful phrase, was inexplicable. A glance over his shoulder revealed naught. He scanned the periphery for a lurking shape, a shadow detached from the gloom. Nothing. With conscious effort, he forced his legs into motion, reaching his building's entrance with hands that trembled as they fumbled with the key. Sleep offered no refuge. His mind raced, conjuring specters, an ancient vagrant cloaked in rags, leaning on a gnarled cane, whistling from the edge of perception. A hooded figure stalking the cobblestones, purposeless yet predatory. The images felt overwrought, theatrical, yet the whistle's reality was undeniable, a truth his own strained nerves screamed. That night, the bed felt colder than ever, his gaze repeatedly drawn to the window, anticipating a watcher below. Around 3 a.m, faint footfalls seemed to echo from the alley, or perhaps it was only the ragged edge of a dream. Morning found him depleted, dark circles blooming beneath his eyes. His colleague inquired jokingly about late-night television binges. Elias lacked the energy to offer the truth. Days later, a fragile resolve solidified within him. He would wait. He would confront the source. Leaving the office earlier than usual, he returned home, briefly sluiced away the day's grime, then donned dark attire and slipped back into the evening chill. He positioned himself against the damp, cool stone near his building's threshold, waiting. The ground beneath his feet was uneven. The air hung thick with the odors of mildew and old refuse. An hour passed, his muscles aching from stillness. Then it began. The whistle, originating deeper within the labyrinthine alleys. Invisible, yet audible. The first long-drawn note sent a clench through his stomach, sweat beading on his brow. Retreat beckoned, a siren call of safety, but he held his ground. He needed to see this whistler to put a face to the fear that haunted his nights. Living under its shadow was no longer sustainable. The melody he now discerned possessed a structure, 4 or 5 notes, a pause, then repetition, a cadence of sorrow amplified by the echoing stone. Elias began to move towards it. His sneakers scuffed on the cobbles. He fought to keep his breathing even against the frantic drumming in his chest, a beat so forceful it felt capable of shattering bone. Ahead, emptiness. He passed beneath the hesitant flicker of a weak street lamp, his own shadow stretching long, distorted beside him, a discomfiting companion. Turning a corner, he saw it, a silhouette poised at the passage's end, an indistinct umbra against the faint luminescence of a distant lamp. His feet rooted themselves to the spot, his jaw tightening. The whistle persisted, clearer now, undeniably emanating from that static form. "Hey!" The shout tore from his throat, the sound swallowed and thrown back by the narrow walls. The silhouette seemed to ripple, to shift, He took tentative steps forward. Abruptly, the whistling ceased. A shuffling sound followed the drag of a shoe on stone. Elias broke into a run. By the time he reached the spot, it was deserted. Heart pounding, breath rasping, he scanned the area. The alley fractured into two smaller, darker paths. He listened intently for the whistle. Silence. A capricious breeze nudged a scrap of paper across the ground. He stooped, retrieving it absently, an old, torn flyer for some forgotten local festival. No answers here. He stood for long moments, swallowing against the dryness in his throat, before turning back towards home, the encounter leaving him more bewildered than resolved. That night was a torment of replays, the silhouette fixed in his mind's eye, roughly his height draped in dark clothing. It could have been anyone, yet there was something in its posture, a stillness that felt like waiting, almost an invitation to be seen. He tossed in bed, the sheets tangling around him. Eventually, he rose, brewed instant coffee that tasted like ash, and stared down into the vacant alley. It offered no clues, only its usual stony indifference. He pulled the window shut, the latch clicking with finality, and tried to will his racing thoughts into submission. The following day, yawns punctuated his work. His supervisor reprimanded him for a careless error on a simple spreadsheet, the embarrassment stinging. His nerves felt frayed to the point of breaking, his focus consumed entirely by the memory and anticipation of that haunting sound. A week bled by in this state. Each night brought the whistle, sometimes distant, a mere suggestion on the wind, other times unnervingly close. Once it seemed to emanate from directly beneath his window. He scrambled to look, heart hammering, but the space below was empty. Frustration festered. He considered involving his landlord, even the police, but the complaint felt flimsy, absurd. Someone is whistling in the alleys. Dismissal seemed inevitable. He attempted to capture the sound with his phone, but each time he pressed record, the whistle would either fade into ambiguity or cease altogether, leaving him with useless recordings of ambient city sighs. Finally, a Friday night arrived, and with it, a surge of desperate determination. A more thorough search was needed. Home from work, he swapped his office shoes for sturdy sneakers, armed himself with a flashlight whose beam felt inadequate against the encroaching dark, and ventured into the warren behind his building. The night air bit at his exposed skin. He jammed his free hand deep into his pocket. Methodically, he navigated the passages, stepping over stagnant puddles and scattered refuse, pausing every few minutes to strain his ears against the silence, listening for that first telltale note. After nearly half an hour, he heard it, seemingly drifting from an alley abutting a deserted courtyard. He moved towards the sound with renewed caution, his pulse throbbing in his temples. He emerged into a small enclosed square, hemmed in by tall, blank walls. A single lamp sputtered in one corner, casting meager light upon a battered wooden bench. The whistle was stronger here, its presence undeniable. He tried to pinpoint its source, his steps crunching on loose gravel near the bench. Then, soft footfalls behind him. He spun, flashlight beams slashing through the darkness. It grazed a figure's outline for a heartbeat before the shape melted behind a low retaining wall. Elias gave chase, lungs burning. Reaching the spot, he found only a shadowed alcove, empty. He swept the flashlight beam across the ground. Gritty pavement, a scattering of fallen leaves, no discernible prints. He stood panting, heart thudding, listening for the whistle. It had vanished once more. A profound chill traced its way down his spine. He extinguished the flashlight, plunging himself into darkness, hoping his eyes might adjust, might catch some flicker of movement. He waited, his own breathing loud in the stillness, the scent of damp stone and ancient moss filling his nostrils. His fingers felt slick around the flashlight's casing. After a minute, or perhaps longer, suspended in silent tension, he flicked the light back on and began a slow retreat. No sight, no sound pursued him. It was nearly 2 a.m. when he finally slumped onto his couch, every muscle thrumming with residual adrenaline, his body aching from the strain. He awoke the next morning to a painfully stiff neck. Over strong, bitter coffee at his small table, he meticulously replayed the previous night's events. A weariness settled deep within him. This city, he knew, held its secrets close, within its old bones, its rumored tunnels, its shuttered rooms and derelict houses. Locals spun tales of phantoms and hidden fortunes, folklore he'd always dismissed. Now he was entangled in a mystery of his own, one that felt disturbingly personal. The persistent whistle, the fleeting silhouette, the pervasive sense of being observed. For several days he attempted defiance through denial. Returning from work, he'd immediately fill his small apartment with music, seeking to drown out the encroaching night sounds. Occasionally, through the melodies, he thought he detected faint, whistling notes, but fiercely told himself it was imagination, auditory ghosts born of stress. A constant ache resided in his stomach. Colleagues remarked on his pallor, his evident fatigue. He offered vague excuses about poor sleep. They suggested a weekend escape, a change of scenery, but leaving felt impossible. A stubborn part of him needed to understand, refused to be driven away by fear. He hated this feeling of powerlessness. One evening, walking the final stretch of alley toward his front door, the whistle returned. This time, however, it possessed a different quality, softer, less insistent, almost contemplative. His entire body went rigid. He turned the key, stepped inside, but paused, holding the door slightly ajar, listening. A quiet scrape on the pavement outside. His heart leaped. Stepping back out, he scanned the lane. The old street lamp hummed its electric song. A moth battered itself against the glass. Then, near a corner, perhaps 30 feet distant, he discerned a faint shape. He took a few cautious steps forward. The shape resolved itself, moved. Unmistakably, a person in dark clothes. The whistle began anew, low and clear. Elias felt his mouth turn to dust, his hands begin to tremble. Shout, run, confront. Indecision paralyzed him. "Stop messing around!" His voice cracked, thin in the heavy air. The figure turned, moved towards him. For a fraction of a second, in the inadequate light, Elias thought he glimpsed a face, indistinct but undeniably male. The man paused, seemed to regard him for a long moment, then turned his back. He walked away down the alley, making no haste, the whistle trailing behind him like a fading echo. Elias stood frozen, stunned, then snapping back to awareness, he ran after him, heart pounding against his ribs. He rounded the corner just in time to see the figure melt into another dark passageway. He sprinted, legs unsteady beneath him. Reaching the entrance to the passage, he found it predictably empty. No resonance of footsteps, no lingering whistle, only the oppressive weight of the alley's silence. The tension in his chest felt suffocating. He realized he was gasping for breath. Dazed, he walked back to his apartment. Sleep was a forgotten country that night. He sat sentinel by the window, attuned to every sigh and rustle from the world outside. Sporadically, faint notes of the whistle would drift by, sharp reminders of the whistler's continued presence, his vigilance. His mind didn't spin elaborate theories or succumb to paralyzing fear. Instead, a simple, stark loop played. He's real, he's quick, he knows these alleys intimately, and this isn't over. Why Elias? Was he the sole focus or one of many? He had no way of knowing. Morning light revealed the toll. In the mirror, his eyes were bloodshot webs, his cheeks hollowed. He couldn't sustain this existence, this siege of nerves. Yet the thought of fleeing, of letting this unseen tormentor drive him from his home, felt like a profound defeat. This city, ancient and confining as it was his anchor. No better harbor awaited him. So a different resolve took root. He would continue to seek the whistler. He would haunt the alleys himself. Wait, listen. He would meet this figure face to face, demand an accounting. How it would end remained shrouded, but hiding was no longer an option. He felt it in his marrow. The whistle held a narrative etched in stone, woven into the fabric of these winding paths. He intended one day to unravel its secret. Until then, his eyes would remain open, his footing sure, his nerves braced. If the whistler revealed himself again, Elias wouldn't run. He was finished with running. And should the whistler choose to corner him, he would stand his ground. He was weary of living in the shadows of this place. One man against the mysteries coiled within these lanes, perhaps, but he would not yield now. That solitary crimson eye, the security camera's indicator light, kept its rhythmic vigil high in the lobby's corner. For innumerable nights it had been a passive companion, but this evening its pulse seemed frantic, echoing the frantic tempo within my own chest. Something felt intrinsically wrong. The very air was thick, charged with an unspoken static, carrying the faintest metallic tang of fear. My predictable nocturnal vigil at Apex Center was, unbeknownst to me, tilting towards an abyss, a descent that would fracture my understanding of this place, my colleagues, and the slippery nature of reality itself. My name is Elias. For 3 years, I've patrolled the quiet hours within Apex Center's shell. By day, a monument of crystalline facade and metallic sheen. By night, it devolved into a geometric maze of dimness where sound traveled unnaturally far down echoing corridors. Usually, the greatest battle was against encroaching sleep. Not this night. This night fractured the pattern. It commenced with the telephone's sudden shriek, slicing the profound quiet and jolting me upright. Expecting my supervisor, perhaps the late cleaning crew, I lifted the receiver. Security console, Elias speaking. I managed, swallowing a yawn. A pause stretched across the line, then a woman's voice emerged. A mere thread of sound, frayed with terror. "You have to help me. I'm trapped." Instantly, the fog of fatigue evaporated. "Ma'am, your location. Where are you within the building?" "I can't tell." The voice trembled, thin as ice. "It's utterly dark. No windows. Please, Find me before they return. My thoughts scrambled. A poorly conceived prank? Some corporate evaluation? Yet the raw panic vibrating in her tone felt chillingly authentic. "All right," I urged, forcing steadiness into my own voice. "Stay calm. I will help you. Can you describe anything? Anything at all about your surroundings?" "Cold," she whispered, and a low hum, like machinery. The sublevels. Unquestionably, the building's mechanical heart resided there. But the logistics were baffling. How had she gained access? And who were they? "I'm coming down," I assured her. "Keep the line open if possible." Snatching my heavy-duty flashlight and radio, I paused. Procedure demanded contacting the authorities awaiting reinforcement, but an instinct, sharp and insistent, screamed against delay. There wasn't time. The elevator's descent felt agonizingly slow, each floor indicator a small eternity. When the doors finally sighed open, an icy exhalation from the building's depths met me, laced with the pervasive thrum of unseen engines. My flashlight beam carved through the gloom, illuminating skeletal pipes and junction boxes studding the concrete expanse. "Hello?" My voice seemed small, swallowed by the vastness. "Is anyone present?" Silence answered. I pressed onward into the subterranean labyrinth, my tread reverberating, each step a lonely percussion against the hard floor. The deeper I ventured, the stronger a sense of profound wrongness coiled within me, a puzzle missing crucial pieces. And then I saw it, tucked behind skeletal filing cabinets in a forgotten recess, a door I swore hadn't existed before, an imposing slab of metal, featureless on this side save for a small, dark keypad. Pressing my ear flat against the cold steel, I held my breath and heard it, faint, desperate weeping from the other side. "Hello?" I called louder this time. "Are you inside? I'm security. I'm here to get you out." The sobbing ceased instantly. "Please," the woman's voice returned, muffled but distinct through the barrier. "Hurry, get me out." I studied the keypad. 4 digits stood between her and freedom. I punched in the standard Apex code, 1234, inactive. I cycled through common combinations, significant building dates, anything plausible. Each attempt met with mocking silence. Frustration tightened its grip. So close. This damnable door. Breaking it down seemed futile. The steel looked capable of shattering bone before yielding. Footsteps scuffed on the concrete behind me. I whirled, flashlight beam finding a known countenance emerging from the gloom. Marcus, another night watchman. "Elias, what the hell are you doing down here?" His features knitted in puzzlement. Rapidly, I relayed the desperate call, the hidden room. Marcus's expression shifted, concern deepening into something akin to pity. "Elias," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "there's no active phone line routed to the sublevels, and that door, it's always been there, leads to the old civil defense shelter. It's been sealed for decades." A glacial tremor traced my vertebrae. "But I heard her, Marcus," I insisted, conviction warring with his certainty. "She's in there, right now." He offered a sympathetic look. "Come on, man, let's head back up. Get some air. You're overtired." But the memory of that terrified voice was too vivid. As Marcus turned, intending to lead me away, I caught his arm. Just help me try the door, please. If it's empty, I'll concede. I promise." Marcus let out a long sigh, but finally nodded. "Fine, but I'm telling you it's locked down tight. Has been since long before our time here." He approached the keypad, his fingers tapping out a sequence. Astonishingly, a distinct click echoed from the lock mechanism. "How did you—" I started, bewildered. "Elias, I really think this is a bad idea," Marcus interjected, unease flickering in his eyes. But I was already heaving the heavy door inward. Ancient hinges screamed in protest, stiff with years of immobility. As the opening widened, my flashlight beam sliced into the space beyond. Empty, utterly barren, just naked concrete walls and a scattering of dust-shrouded archaic furniture. I stood there, reeling, suspended in disbelief. Had I hallucinated the entire episode? Was my grasp on reality fraying? Then my light caught an anomaly in the thick carpet of dust coating the floor. Footprints, unmistakably fresh, leading deeper into the shelter's darkness. "Marcus," I breathed, the sound barely audible. "Look." But when I turned, Marcus was no longer there. In his place stood a figure I'd never encountered, impeccably dressed in a severe black suit, his face impassive. Before shock could even register, before I could form a question, he raised a hand. A blinding flash erupted, engulfing my vision, followed by an abrupt, consuming void. Consciousness returned with the unwelcome glare of morning sun slanting through the lobby's vast windows. My skull throbbed with a dull ache, accompanied by a phantom ache of significance, a feeling that something vital had transpired, yet its details remained stubbornly veiled. As I collected my belongings, preparing for departure, Mr. Finch, the day's supervisor, approached briskly. "Morning, Elias," he chirped. "Quiet night? Anything noteworthy for the log?" I opened my mouth, the impulse to recount the night's strangeness rising, then faltering. Nebulous impressions flickered at the edge of thought. A desperate plea over the phone, the subterranean cold, a sealed metal door. It all felt distant, possessing the texture of forgotten sleep. "No, sir," I heard myself reply. "All quiet." He nodded, apparently satisfied, and continued on his way. But as I moved towards the main entrance, a glance towards the security monitors froze me. There, displayed on one screen, was the feed from the sub-level corridor, and tucked in the corner, partially obscured but undeniably present, was a steel door I had never officially noticed before. In the subsequent weeks, tentative inquiries, attempts to retrace those steps, dissolved into frustrating loops. Each time I felt close to grasping a thread of truth, I would find myself inexplicably back at the security console, hours unaccounted for, my memory reset. My colleagues maintained an air of normalcy, yet sometimes I'd catch their gazes lingering, tinged with an unnerving wariness. Apex Center, I now understand, is far more than an edifice of commerce. It is a container for secrets, potent ones, and the unseen forces managing these secrets possess the chilling ability to excise recollections, to make inconvenient individuals simply cease to be. I commit this account to record now hastily, while the narrative remains somewhat intact within me, because a chilling premonition insists that my own erasure might be imminent. If this message finds you, do not dismiss it, as I initially dismissed that woman's desperate cries. Something deeply disturbing unfolds within these walls. Something terrifyingly efficient, and I suspect this is merely the overture. Remember the rhythm of the crimson light. Remember the door that should not open, and trust no one within Apex Center. Above all, do not even trust the integrity of your own memory. The memory clings, sharp as broken glass. The first time the request for room 8113 breached the lobby's quietude. A Thursday, the clock hands creeping towards 9. I was adrift behind the front desk, anchored only by the worn mahogany counter, navigating a sea of invoices. Then he materialized. A man whose entrance felt less like walking in and more like coalescing from the evening shadows. His eyes swept the space, a quick, assessing glance before fixing on me. His shirt bore the map of a restless journey in its creases. A small, overstuffed valise strained at its latches beside him. He desired lodging, yes, but his request was laser-specific, uttered with a strange gravity. Room 813. Only 3 floors graced our establishment, I explained, the room numbers cresting at a modest 310. No 8th floor existed, consequently no 813. His gaze drifted towards the antiquated elevator cage, then snapped back to me, a slow shake of his head. The only reply. He needed 813. The words were repeated, devoid of explanation or agitation, a calm, unwavering insistence. My fingers danced across the keyboard, conjuring the hotel's blueprint onto the monitor's glow. Again, articulating each syllable with forced clarity, I reiterated the room's non-existence within these walls. He stared, unblinking, at the digital layout for a stretched heartbeat. A sigh escaped him, a whisper of resignation. Very well, he conceded. Whatever space was free would suffice. Keycard 307 exchanged hands. A murmured thanks, and he pivoted, swallowed by the groaning steel jaws of the elevator. The moment the doors sealed him away, a disquiet settled over me, cold and unwelcome. Why that particular number? Why the fixation on phantom architecture? I tried to dismiss it. The eccentricities of weary travelers were legion. Back to the invoices, the comforting certainty of figures. Yet, for the remainder of that shift, every chime of the ascending or descending elevator sent a jolt through me, a tensing anticipation of his return, his quiet, impossible demand for 813 echoing in the lobby's stillness. Later, much later, when the night had deepened towards 2, the desk phone shrilled, an internal line. My eyes flickered to the caller ID, 813. The numerals pulsed on the small screen. A frantic drummer took up residence behind my ribs. A system fault, surely. Our telephone network, a relic of bygone decades, was prone to spectral hiccups. But the ringing persisted, insistent. I lifted the receiver. Static whispered back, a faint, sibilant hiss devoid of voice or breath. Just the sound of empty space crackling. Hello? I ventured once, twice. Silence answered, followed by the sharp punctuation of a click. The line died. Replacing the receiver felt like setting down something fragile and dangerous. A chill traced the nape of my neck. I chafed my arms, whispering rationalizations about crossed wires and technical gremlins. We'd seen phantom extensions before, momentary glitches in the age system. Yet the stark finality of 8113 on that display, it resonated differently. I found myself staring at the inert black plastic of the phone, half expecting its summons to tear through the silence again. It remained mute. Around 3, the slow hour, I commenced my rounds, a ritual to break the monotony. Through the lobby, adjusting askew lounge chairs, confirming the bolted front doors, then ascending in the clattering elevator cage to the second floor. A walk through the corridors, a quiet inspection. The plush carpet drank the sound of my footsteps, leaving only a muffled cadence in the hushed air. Room 203, 204, 205 slid past, unremarkable. Near the elevator bank, I paused, gazing through the landing window at the streetlights painting the vacant asphalt below. It was then I saw it, an anomalous luminescence staining the far end of the corridor. Brighter than the standard ceiling fixtures, it pooled unnaturally on the patterned wallpaper. A knot tightened in my gut as I moved towards it, dismissing it initially as a failing bulb's frantic pulse. Closer now, the source resolved itself. A door where no door should be. The corridor terminated unequivocally at room 210. Yet there it stood, solid and undeniable, adorned with burnished brass numerals, 813. I froze, the blood draining from my face, my palms suddenly slick with cold sweat. My own pulse throbbed, a frantic beat against my eardrums. Hesitantly, compelled by a morbid curiosity that overrode rising fear, I advanced, squinting. 813, unmistakable. The door itself possessed a subtle newness. Smoother grain, a more contemporary handle than its neighbors. My hand reached out, trembling slightly, fingers brushing the metallic knob. An intense cold radiated from it, biting into my skin. A low hum vibrated faintly in the air, the thrum of unseen machinery. My temples began to pound. I blinked, shaking my head to clear it. The corridor lights flickered, once violently, and when my vision settled, the door was simply not there. Only the unbroken expanse of floral wallpaper stretched before me, seamless and indifferent. My hand hovered in empty space, grasping at nothing. A ragged breath escaped me. I retreated, my knees threatening to buckle. Exhaustion, I told myself. Hallucinations born of fatigue and solitude. But the chill of the doorknob lingered on my fingertips, a phantom sensation refusing dismissal. The rest of the night passed in a blur of strained normalcy. I returned to the lobby's relative sanctuary, the desk phone now an object of intense scrutiny. The traveler from 307 remained sequestered above. Morning light brought him back to the desk, waiting patiently at checkout. He returned the key card, then inquired, his voice flat about extending his stay. Availability confirmed, he nodded. And then the inevitable reprise. Could he perhaps secure room 8113 for the subsequent night? No, I managed, my voice tighter than intended. That room is not available. It doesn't exist. A beat of silence stretched between us. He conceded, retaining 307, offering no further word, no hint of why. He turned and walked away. A dozen questions burned on my tongue. Did you call last night? Did you see anything? Hear anything? But the sheer vacancy in his gaze silenced me. It was a look devoid of warmth, of inquiry, the placid stare of someone who already possessed all the answers they required. Dread was my unwelcome companion as I clocked in that evening. Taking over from the afternoon shift around 7, I donned a mask of professional calm. Lobby surveillance, guest greetings, the busy work of the night shift. By 10, the quiet descended, leaving only myself and the night porter, who invariably retreated to the staff room's embrace. 11 o'clock. The phone rang. Caller ID 813. My heart hammered against my ribs. A few rings echoed unanswered before morbid compulsion won. I snatched up the receiver. Again the static sighed, a soft, persistent rushing sound. My attempts at communication met only emptiness, then the familiar click, the abrupt silence. Investigation became imperative. Perhaps the phone in 307 was the culprit, its signals somehow mislabeled by the archaic system. A quick check confirmed the traveler's continued occupancy. Master key in hand, I ascended. The second-floor hallway felt dimmer tonight, the lights buzzing and sputtering with their usual geriatric inconsistency. Straight to 307. My knock was answered promptly, the door cracking open to reveal the traveler's impassive face. He waited. Had he attempted to call the desk? A negative shake of the head. Was his phone operational? He hadn't used it, he replied with a shrug. Could I test it? He stepped back, granting silent permission. Inside, the receiver yielded a standard dial tone. Pressing the front desk extension triggered the phone downstairs. All perfectly functional. He observed me throughout, his expression unreadable, offering no comment. I thanked him curtly and retreated. Back in the lobby's relative safety, I accessed the phone system's diagnostic panel, hidden behind the desk. The logs were starkly clear. 2 calls registered that night, both originating from extension 813. No activity whatsoever from 307. The chill returned, prickling my skin. Closing the panel, my gaze fell upon the short corridor leading to the rear service exit. It looked wrong, elongated. What should have been a 20-foot passage seemed to stretch onwards, 40, perhaps 50 feet, terminating in flickering, uncertain light. Against every instinct screaming for retreat, I took hesitant steps forward. A high-pitched ringing commenced in my ears. My mouth felt instantly dry. Nearing the distorted end of the passage, I saw it materialize on the right-hand wall, a door where blank plaster should be. 813. The same brass numerals glinted, the same modern handle. I halted, breath catching in my throat. A glance back confirmed my solitude. Calling out felt utterly futile. My hand reached again for the knob. Cold, solid, real. I twisted, locked. I stood there, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. From the distant lobby, the desk phone began its shrill summons. The corridor lights pulsed. I turned towards the sound. When I looked back, the door had vanished. The corridor snapped back to its proper dimensions. I stumbled back to the desk, gasping, the phone having fallen silent. The remainder of the night was a waking dream of subtle distortions. The lobby floor seemed to tilt imperceptibly. A doorway on the second floor would appear slightly shifted, only to correct itself upon a second glance. Nausea churned within me. Restless and clammy, I tried to lose myself in paperwork, but my eyes kept straying to the phone, waiting. It remained blessedly quiet until the dawn. The following day, around noon, the traveler reappeared. Fatigue etched dark smudges beneath his eyes. "Checking out," he said. He settled his account, surrendered the key. The urge to probe, to demand answers about 813 surged within me. Some intuition insisted he held a piece of this puzzle, but the words wouldn't form. He held my gaze for a long moment, then turned, valise in hand, and walked out through the revolving glass doors. disappearing into the mundane world outside. With his departure, a fragile hope emerged. Perhaps the phenomenon was tied to him, and normalcy would now resume. That evening around 10, a familiar headache began to bloom behind my eyes. A restless circuit of the lobby offered little distraction. Then the inevitable, the phone's strident ring, extension 8-13. A surge of adrenaline, hot and sharp. I snatched the receiver, almost shouting into it. "Who is this?" Static answered, thick and invasive. Then something else, a whisper, faint, indistinct, as if filtered through layers of heavy fabric. Unintelligible words brushed against my ear. Silence. Click. Deadline. Enough. Slamming the phone down, a new resolve hardened within me. A full sweep, every floor, every corridor. I needed tangible proof of 811's non-existence to reclaim my sanity. Elevator to the 3rd floor. I paced its length, scrutinizing each numbered door. 301, 302, 303, all present, accounted for, blessedly ordinary. Down to the 2nd floor, the same methodical patrol. All seemed stable. I paused near the elevator again, the familiar hum of the overhead lights, a low thrum in the quiet. And then, inevitably, my eyes were drawn to the corridor's terminus. There it stood, 813. This time, no hesitation. I marched towards it, propelled by a mixture of terror and defiance. My heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. My lips felt numb, trembling. The door felt impossibly solid beneath my questing hand. Master key slid into the lock. It turned, but the door refused to yield, resisting my push as if braced from within. I threw my shoulder against the wood, rattling the handle. A heavy thud echoed from the other side, the sound of furniture toppling. Ice water flooded my veins. I recoiled instinctively. The door slammed shut of its own accord. The brass numerals 813 flickered, momentarily incandescent, like tiny filament bulbs. Then, in the space of a blink, the entire structure dissolved. Blank wall, empty space. My legs trembled violently as I retreated towards the elevator, jabbing the call button with frantic repetition. The ascent felt agonizingly slow. Bursting into the lobby, lightheaded and drenched in cold sweat, I collapsed into the desk chair. Concentration shattered. Every creak of the old building, every fleeting shadow became a source of alarm. Around 4 a.m. I surrendered, forcing myself to remain seated, simply waiting for the sanctuary of daylight. Walking the halls felt unbearable. The calls persisted over the following nights, though their frequency waned. Always 813. Sometimes the static, sometimes the muffled whispers. Sometimes I let it ring itself into silence. The door, too, continued its apparitions, more sporadic now, at the end of hallways tucked into shadowed lobby corners, once even glimpsed near the external delivery bay. Always the same smooth wood, the cold knob, the brass numerals. Always locked or vanishing before I could fully engage with it. Sometimes it winked out instantly, other times it lingered, mocking my stare until a flicker of the lights erased it. I delved into the hotel's archives, poring over brittle blueprints and dusty maintenance logs stored in the back office. No 8th floor, no room 8113. The building plans depicted only 3 stories. The phone system manual listed no such extension. Logic offered no anchor. I felt caught in a recursive nightmare, a loop of fear and bewilderment. Quitting wasn't an option, yet each approaching night shift filled me with a profound sense of dread. My attempts to explain were met with skepticism by the manager. Overwork, stress, perhaps a needed vacation, but walking away felt impossible. An obsessive need to understand, to confront the inexplicable, kept me tethered to this place. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the phenomena subsided. After 4 weeks, the calls dwindled to 1 a night, then ceased altogether. The door sightings became rarer still, perhaps once every few nights, always dissolving before I could approach. 2 months passed in relative peace. A fragile sense of normalcy began to mend. I started to believe it was over, relegated to a bizarre, unsettling memory. Then, one quiet night, deep into the shift, lost in the mundane task of reviewing handover notes, the lobby was still, deserted. Suddenly, the familiar icy prickle returned to the back of my neck. I turned. There, directly behind the front desk, usurping the space usually occupied by the manager's office door, stood 813. It looked pristine, freshly painted, its handle gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. My heart seized, threatening to crack my ribs. Flight was the rational impulse, yet an irresistible pull held me fast. I moved towards it, my steps leaden, palms damp. My hand rested on the knob, cold, unyieldingly cold. With infinite slowness, I turned it. The door opened a fraction. That low electrical hum emanated from the darkness within. I leaned closer, peering into the obsidian void. A wave of profound nausea washed over me. Then, with violent abruptness, the door slammed shut, narrowly missing my fingers. I stumbled back. A heartbeat later, it was gone. The familiar manager's office door stood in its place, complete with the engraved nameplate. I stood there, hyperventilating, pulse racing erratically. The phone remained silent. Backing away, my mind churned uselessly, seeking explanations that refused to form. In that moment, a chilling certainty settled upon me. The truth behind room 813, whatever it was, lay beyond my comprehension. It manifested, it vanished. It called, but offered no message. I still worked the night shift. I performed the rituals, check-ins, calls, rounds. Sometimes a flicker in my peripheral vision, a hint of smooth wood and brass numerals glimpsed down a hallway near a stairwell. Direct gaze inevitably dissolves the apparition. I no longer speak of it. Belief is a currency I don't possess among the staff, but the knowledge remains an unwelcome tenant in my mind. I know what I saw, what I continue to see, and every time the phone rings in the dead hours, a tremor runs through my hand as I reach for the receiver, forever uncertain if the call originates from a room woven from nightmares, a room that should not exist, and perhaps, just perhaps, one night the knob will turn freely, the door will swing wide. What waits on the other side is a question I both dread and morbidly anticipate answering.